Hello, how's it going? In today's video, I'm covering Mysteries of Maraudon and the Ruins of Dire Maul from Chronicle Volume 3. So let's go! The war between the Tauren tribes and the Centaur had been going on for over 1,000 years, and it was pretty relentless. There had been countless casualties on both sides, but when the Tauren joined the Horde, War Chief Thrall had been a nice bloke and made sure they were protected. Any Centaur that was dumb enough to enter Tauren lands quickly learned that that was probably the worst decision they'd ever made, and as a result, there was now a bit of respite in the war. Most of the Centaur retreated back to the lifeless region of Desolace, whilst the Tauren looked toward a bright future in Thunder Bluff. But then, after a few years, the Centaur warband swarmed out of Desolace and started attacking the surrounding regions again. Either they had very short memories and low attention spans, or something fishy was afoot. So Thrall called on the emerging heroes of the Horde to handle this disturbance and stop these Centaur from playing silly buggers ever again. The first discovery was that the various Centaur tribes were actually slaughtering each other just as much as they were attacking outsiders. Bit weird, so they investigated further. This led them to an encounter with a Centaur named Warug, who was the leader of the Magram tribe. Warug told them that Desolace had been corrupted, and the source of this corruption was in a place called Maraudon. This place was sacred ground to the Centaur, and also just so happened to house the earth elemental known as Princess Theradras, and the spirit of her fallen boyfriend, Zatar, the son of Cenarius. Legend has it that the Centaur race was born from those two, although Zatar wasn't a big fan of his own kids, so they ended up killing him or something. Basically the type of family dynamic you'd expect to see on Jeremy Kyle, or Jerry Springer, or Dr. Phil, one of those shows about shit families. Theradras, on the other hand, loved her kids. She worried that the Horde's rise to power might eventually drive them to extinction, so she infused them with her power and pushed them to make war. Most of the Centaur tribes were loyal to the princess, except the Magram. They thought she was a bitch. So the Horde helped their new Centaur allies and suppressed the other violent tribes. The Horde champions then turned their gaze on Maraudon itself. They journeyed into the depths of the burial ground and defeated the various creatures within, and then they faced Theradras. But don't worry, this group had tactics again. She looked like she hit pretty hard, being an earth elemental and stuff, but the tank wasn't scared, not for shit. He positioned himself against a nearby wall, so every time she tried to knock him back, he just bounced off it. It looked dumb, but it was effective. Every now and then, she'd shoot one of the members of the group the stink eye, which kinda terrified them for about 6 seconds, and they'd run around like a headless chicken. But to be honest, this fight is basically a tank and spank, so they eventually beat the princess. And with her defeat, the corruption in Desolace and the bloodlust of the Centaur came to an end. With the Horde's blessing, Warug and his Magram tribe became the rulers of the United Centaur and led them on a path of tranquility, although it's still up in the air as to whether they stay on this path of peace. However, the Horde barely had an opportunity to sit down before a new source of darkness emerged. Deep within the forests of Feralas, ogres were acting a bit mental. They were raising settlements as well as killing travellers, unfortunate enough to have crossed their path. Plus, druids had sensed corruption and decay twisting the wilds. The Horde led skirmishes throughout Feralas and learned that the source of these troubles was inside Dire Maul, the old ruins of the elven city once known as Eldrath. Flashback, almost 15 years ago, an ogre leader known as GORDOK had led his people, the GORDONI, to Dire Maul. They turned these ruins into a gladiatorial arena, because why not? This proved to be an extremely popular tourist spot amongst the mercenaries and miscreants of the world, so the GORDONI were actually doing pretty well for themselves. GORDOK had always been cruel and ruthless, but terrible whispers had entered his mind, urging him to madness and slaughter. So basically, this recent aggression from the ogres was his doing. The Horde decided enough was enough, and dispatched its forces to scour the GORDONI from Dire Maul. The champions had expected to only kill GORDOK and end his reign of madness, but when they arrived, they just kept getting distracted. They discovered 2 different sources of corruption in the city. The first was the Emerald Nightmare. This dark energy of the old gods had slipped into the physical world, and it was this that had caused GORDOK's insanity. The Horde champions knew that eradicating it was the only way to spare Feralas, so they entered the WARPWOOD quarter, which had been taken over by a satyr called Alzin, the Wild Shaper. And the fight with him was pretty straightforward, but annoying. Being a druid of sorts, he kept bloody shifting forms like a jerk, and a short while into the fight, he randomly summoned a load of imps, so I guess he's one of them druid warlocks or something. But the Horde champions won, and that was the end of the Emerald Nightmare corruption. The second unexpected source of corruption within Dire Maul was in the Western Wing, Capital Gardens. A secretive group of elves, called the Chandra were hidden, living within the bones of their old city. They didn't seem all that bothered by the champions entering their part of the ruins, but when the Horde champions discovered that these elves had imprisoned a demon named immol'thar and were feeding on its power, our heroes were like, "No, this is just bloody outrageous, you bunch of jerks." The only way to slay the demon was to free it first. Of course it was. There were 5 pylons dotted around the Western Wing, each guarded by arcane torrents that were hard as nails. But once these pylons had been destroyed, immol'thar's prison was deactivated, and the heroes were like, now let's murder it. Once again, a pretty straightforward but annoying fight. Immol'thar kept spawning these floating eye things that made everyone fight in slow motion, and it was kinda boring. But eventually the demon fell. This cut off the elves' source of power, so their leader, Prince Tortheldrim, was like, you what mate? And led a counterattack against the champions. But they dealt with him pretty easily as well. It's lucky this group's good, isn't it? Otherwise it would be difficult to tell the story. I'd be shit out of luck if they just wiped and then disbanded. But anyway, the rest of the Chandrilar elves fled Dire Maul. They'd spent years wandering the wilds trying to wean themselves off demonic power and feel whole again. Now the sources of corruption had been cleansed, GORDOK was probably like, oh my, I feel really guilty about everything I've done. But sod him, let's kill him anyway. The champions entered the northern wing of the ruins called GORDOK Commons. This was quite a bit harder than the other parts of Dire Maul, and some guy was there like, psst, you wanna do some quests and skip straight to the end boss? And the champions were like, piss off, guaranteed rare drops mate. When they reached the ogre leader, he wasn't alone. Another ogre called Chorush the Observer joined the fight against the champions. He kept casting beneficial spells on GORDOK, so one champion focused on him, whilst everyone else just tank and spanked the boss man. And when the boss man fell, Chorush was like, soz mates, I don't want to fight anymore, I surrender. Weirdly, everyone in the group became king of the ogres when GORDOK fell, but then they left Dire Maul, and the ogres just appointed another king instead. Fickle jerks. But the ogre threat was now over, and the Horde champions could finally go home and sit down. And we're leaving it there! In the next Volume 3 video, the Blackwing Lair raid, which is another Horde raid based on Chronicle canon, but I swear to God I'm not faction biased. As always, thanks very much to those of you who support the channel as patrons. If anyone would like to support the channel in that way, links in the description. If you enjoyed this video, like, subscribe, all of that bollocks. And all that's left to say is, thanks for watching, and see ya!